Active Minds kids ask about mummies. How are mummies studied? 35 questions you need answered now. Written by Ken Goyne. Illustrated by Will Davis. Narrated by Sam Morant. Who were the most important mummies in ancient Egypt? In ancient Egypt, the most elaborate mummies were made from the bodies of people with wealth or power. Above even those elite people were the rulers, called pharaohs. The pharaohs were worshipped as if they were gods themselves. It's little wonder that some of the greatest tombs ever built to house mummies were created for the pharaohs. Did you know? Any dead body that still has skin on it may be called a mummy. When were Egyptian mummies first made? Beginning around 5,000 years ago, in the desert land of Egypt, great temples were built by order of the pharaohs. These temples were mansions for the gods that ruled the land of the living and the land of the dead. And the priests of these gods helped transform millions of bodies into mummies. Did you know? Pharaohs were mostly male. There were also female pharaohs, however, such as Cleopatra, Hatshepsut, and Nefertiti. Why mummify? The priests of ancient Egypt wanted to make sure that bodies looked in death as they had in life. Egyptians believed that at the moment of death, two spirits that give human beings life, Ka, and soul, Ba, leave the body. Those departed spirits were believed to re-enter the body after mummification so the person could live again in the land of the dead. So it was very important for the spirits to be able to recognize their body. Did you know? Ancient Egypt wasn't the only civilization that mummified its dead. People created the oldest mummies around 7,000 years ago in Chile and Peru. That's about 2,000 years before Egyptians began mummifying. Ancient Egypt. Did you know? The mummy of Pharaoh Khufu was placed in what is called the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is the largest stone structure in the world, consisting of 2,300,000 stone blocks. Each weighs several tons. How do we know about ancient Egyptians' beliefs? We know all of this mainly because scientists found writings called hieroglyphs on the walls and objects inside tombs. When they learned to read the symbols, they began to understand more about ancient Egyptian beliefs and why mummies were created. Great Pyramid of Giza. Did you know? The oldest known mummy in the world developed naturally without the use of embalming or preserving ingredients. Known as the Spirit Cave mummy, it was discovered in Nevada in 1940. Special tests determined that it is over 10,000 years old. In 2018, the body was returned to its tribal descendants in Nevada and given a burial. How were mummies made naturally? The first mummified bodies were naturally preserved by exposure to extremely dry or cold air. This usually happened accidentally, but ancient Egyptians also dried bodies in the hot desert sand. In those cases, they dug an oval grave and placed the body inside with its head turned west, facing the setting sun. They buried objects they believed would be needed in the next life with the body. They then covered the body with sand. This process mummified the body naturally. How did people embalm mummies? As the centuries passed, people developed more elaborate ways to embalm bodies with greater care. For pharaohs or wealthy Egyptians, it could take 70 days to turn a body into a mummy. Did you know? The workers who created the mummies are called embalmers. What happened first during mummification? First, most of the internal organs, except for the heart and kidneys, were removed. They were then embalmed and put in special containers called canopic jars. Then, the whole body was covered with oil and spices. Next, the corpse was caked with natron. Natron is a natural kind of salt that absorbs all moisture as it kills the bacteria that rot flesh. The natron was left on for about 40 days. Did you know? During embalming, the brain was pulled out through the nose with a special instrument made for that purpose. What happened next during mummification? After washing off the salt, embalmers rubbed the body with a mixture of oils, wax, and gum to keep the skin from cracking. They then spread tree resin over the corpse to keep air away from the skin. They did this for the same reasons that dentists coat our teeth with sealants to prevent tooth decay. Did you know? Each finger and toe was wrapped separately. How did embalmers keep mummies in good shape? Corpses wrinkle and shrivel over time. To help the body keep its shape, a mummy's embalmers stuffed it with sand, sawdust, and wads of cloth. Then, they tightly wrapped the mummy in layers of linen bandages. Each layer was brushed with resin to make the bandages stick together. Why were mummies' faces covered with masks? A mask of the person's face was placed over the head so the spirits would recognize the person when they returned. This was especially important because the head and body were wrapped in bandages. What were the final steps in preparing a mummy? Finally, the body was laid in its case, which was often made in the shape of the mummy. Sometimes, for pharaohs and the wealthy, there were inner and outer cases. These cases were heavily decorated with gold and hieroglyphs. Inside the tomb, the mummy's coffin was placed inside a very heavy stone box called a sarcophagus. Did you know? The Egyptian Book of the Dead was a book of religious and magical texts and spells to help the dead on their difficult journey to a new life. Were mummies always safe? No. Grave robbers looted most of the large tombs, such as the pyramids at Giza, in the years following their inhabitants' death. Looking for the gold and gems used as magic charms, thieves even unwrapped the mummies. Did you know? Around 1000 BC, priests decided to gather up all the royal mummies and hide them. This hiding place, also near ancient Thebes, was not discovered until the 1870s, almost 3,000 years later. The remains were found by a local family. Family members revealed the location of the tomb after they had looted it themselves. What was done to save the mummies? To protect the pharaoh's mummies from grave robbers, they were eventually moved from the pyramids at Giza. The royal mummies were transported to the Valley of the Kings, a deserted place near the city of Thebes. The tombs in this valley were cut deep into the desert rock and unmarked. Even so, they were robbed. What was King Tut's tomb? On November 26, 1922, a British Egyptologist looked through a small hole into a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. What he saw dazzled him. Mummy cases, shrines, statues, furniture, and jewelry covered by gold and gemstones gleamed in the torchlight. This incredible discovery would become popularly known as King Tut's tomb. Who was King Tut? Scientists determined that this was the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. The young king died when he was less than 20 years old. His solid gold coffin weighed 296 pounds, 134.3 kilograms. For years, King Tut was a figure in songs, movies, and popular legends. A number of products and businesses were named after King Tut, and a U.S. president even named his dog King Tut. Did you know? When King Tut's tomb was opened, mysterious deaths occurred among people working on the project. Rumors about a mummy's curse on those who opened the tomb soon circulated. Were people always fascinated by mummies? Until about 200 years ago, people didn't study mummies. In fact, local people used to burn them as fuel because they caught fire easily. Other people ground them up to use as medicine. When did people start taking an interest in mummies? The first modern explorers arrived in Egypt in the early 1800s. This is when archaeologists realized that understanding and preserving the mummies were keys to understanding ancient Egypt. How are mummies studied? At first, researchers unwrapped the mummies to figure out what people looked like 5,000 years ago. They also were able to learn how long people lived and how they died. Today, with CAT scans and other X-ray machines, scientists can examine mummies without disturbing their cases and bandages. This keeps mummies safe from air, which hastens their decay. Did you know? Pharaohs weren't the only mummies in ancient Egypt. Common people and even animals were mummified. Some experts estimate that at least 70 million Egyptian mummies may have been created. In early Hollywood horror films, mummies became great stars. In the 1932 movie, The Mummy, an archaeologist reads aloud an ancient spell and brings a mummified priest back to life. In the 1800s, over 300,000 cat mummies were shipped to England, where they were ground up for use as garden fertilizer. The god of mummification and the dead was called Anubis. He had the head of a jackal. Priests wore masks that looked like Anubis during embalming ceremonies. In 1996, a huge burial site was discovered in the desert west of the Nile River. Many of the mummies at the site were cloaked in golden masks. Researchers estimate that more than 10,000 mummies will eventually be found. The area is now called Valley of the Golden Mummies. Did you know? In 2021, scientists made a startling discovery. With the aid of advanced scanners, they determined that an Egyptian mummy discovered 200 years ago was not a man, as they previously thought, but a pregnant woman. This is the only known instance of an unborn child being detected in a mummy. The scientists who discovered it don't think it will be the last. For centuries, many mysteries buried in the sands of ancient Egypt have come to light. And there are no doubt countless more to come.